Greetings, I'm Wham Bam Duel, and today I'm making this video with a heavy heart. As I'm sure everybody has heard, Kazuki Takahashi, creator of Yu-Gi-Oh, died on July 6th, 2022. At first, I thought he went peacefully, not realizing he was only in his 60s, but as it turns out, it was much worse. Whether or not you believe in a god, I know that my thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends first and foremost. I'd like to take this unfortunate occasion as a chance to recount how his magnum opus, Yu-Gi-Oh, has changed my life. I'd like to share my story. While I'd still like to remain anonymous, this will involve some rather personal details to myself. Some names will be changed to conceal identities. My Yu-Gi-Oh journey started about 13 years and 3 months ago, in April of 2009, when I was 6 with my 2 brothers. The older brother, who will be called Dan, who is 4 years older than me, and the middle brother, who will be called Chris, who is 2 years older than me, leaving me as the youngest. Chris and I shared a room growing up, with Dan's room right next to ours. One night, Dan called Chris into his room to show him a game he was planning on getting into. I was not invited into Dan's room at first, but the idea of being left out of whatever Dan was showing Chris left me intrigued. I entered Dan's room as he welcomed me into what he was showing Chris. Yu-Gi-Oh cards. To this day, I do not know how he got his hands on them, but he handed Chris and I each 2 cards. Chris has got Zone Eater and one other card I can't recall, and I got Magic Drain and Tribute to the Doomed. The next day, our mom drove us to Toys R Us, where Dan got the starter deck 5Ds 2009 with Road Warrior as his first boss. As for Chris and I, we both wanted the Zombie World structure deck, so we played rock, paper, scissors for it. I won, making my first boss monster the Red Eyes Zombie Dragon, leaving Chris to get the Spellcaster's Command structure deck with Endymion, the Master Magician, as his first boss. Being 6, 8, and 10, none of us knew what we were really doing at first, and we mostly just played around thinking that a tribute summon counted as a special summon, and me not realizing how to use any kind of monster effect outside of Partition of Darkness. The next notable event in our journey occurred a few weeks later, as my brothers and I were in Cub Scouts at the time, and our pack had visited a children's museum where we got to stay the night. Chris was the only one who brought his deck, but he traded a good number of cards to another scout for their Dark Magician card. None of my brothers nor I had even seen or knew there was a Yu-Gi-Oh anime yet, but Chris was drawn to the Dark Magician as it credited itself as being the ultimate wizard of terms in attack and defense. To this day, he still refers to that Dark Magician as his lucky Dark Magician. About 2 years later, we had discovered a local card shop being run out of an apartment complex, where we learned about the new up-and-coming website Dueling Network. By this point, Dan's main deck was Black Wings. Chris had received loads and loads of cards from friends of his who had left the game, making his new main deck a hero deck, with Electrum as his boss monster. And I had moved from zombies to the Machina Mayhem structure deck, with Machina Force as my boss monster, although back then I pronounced it Machina, and I still do that sometimes to this day. At the end of the year, our great-grandmother had bought all 3 of us the Zexal starter deck as a Christmas gift. My brothers and I had begun to understand the game a little better at this point, knowing how to overlay an Xyz summon, but I still kept most of my decks pure. The next year, Dan got a new deck, the Dark World deck, with Grapha as his new boss. That summer, we went on a trip across the world, to a country I will not name, to meet family. A distant cousin of ours also played Yu-Gi-Oh, and was much older, knowing the game much better, but in hindsight, still not being that great. He played a deck that, from what I recall, had an entire strategy built around returning cards to the opponent's hand. I remember him playing Neo-Spatian Grand Mole and Ordeal of a Traveler, which near the end of the trip, he gave Grand Mole to Chris for his hero deck, and Ordeal of a Traveler to me. By this point, Chris and I had several underdeveloped decks. Chris had a Chaos Dragon deck with Future Fusion and 5-Headed Dragon, and I had several field spell decks made from bulk, where I'd take a field spell, be it Mountain, Yami, Forest, etc., and I'd build a deck comprising of monsters supported by those field spells that also had type synergies with one another. Near the end of the trip, Dan gave me the Dark World deck, the most powerful deck any of us had, as a gift, as I, still to that point, had never won a duel against either of my brothers. Dan hoped to remedy this, but Chris saw this as an opportunity. Through a little bit of what I recall to be manipulation, Chris gave me a bum deal trade for the Dark World deck that I reluctantly accepted. Unlike myself at the time, Chris knew how to deck build, and he took the deck to our locals, which had moved to a larger location by now, and got deck building help from all the owners of the store. The Dark World deck was now unstoppable among my brothers and I. It was at this point that I regretted the trade. But it was also at this point that my brothers and I had realized that the best way to make a deck from a structure deck was to get multiple copies. By the end of 2012, Dan's new deck was 6 Samurai, with the legendary Shi-En as his boss, the only deck that could even stand up against Chris's Dark World deck, with 3 copies of Grapha as its boss. The next year, Dan got sick of losing over and over to the Dark World deck, and left the game, with the reason being that he didn't want to see the day when I would beat him. Friendly reminder that we were all still very young at this point, so all of these actions that seem to be at my expense are forgiven between my brothers and I by now. With only Chris's Dark World deck to play against, I too quit the game. Chris had all of everybody's cards now, and wasn't likely to give anything back at this point. About a month later, Chris regretted beating Dan and I out of the game. Although Dan had no intention of returning, Chris convinced me to return after enlightening me about Gravekeepers, a deck that could counter the Dark World deck. This excited me, and got me back into the game. I played Gravekeepers for a few years, trying and failing to beat the Dark World deck, but this time, I didn't give up, and I kept trying. This was back at the point when Necro Valley didn't properly counter Grapha, so the matchup was still pretty tough, but I kept looking forward. A couple years later, in 2014, after I started middle school, I discovered the Yu-Gi-Oh anime. Although I had heard about it from Dan when he discovered it a couple years prior, something about the Great Leviathan, this was when I first really got into Yu-Gi-Oh, with the original creation of Kazuki Takahashi, Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters. That was the year that I got my first mobile device, an iPod Touch Generation 5, where I'd go to Yu-Gi-Oh.com every night and watch Yu-Gi-Oh! By far, Seto Kaiba was my favorite character, and he still is to this day. I lamented over how I didn't have any Blue Eyes White Dragons, so Chris gave me one to start my collection of them. 2015 and 2016 passed with nothing really new happening aside from Chris and I getting generally more competent at the game and improving our decks, as we constantly got new cards as birthday and Christmas gifts. It was also around this time that I started to read the Yu-Gi-Oh manga so I could get to the original creation of Kazuki Takahashi with the very first Yu-Gi-Oh manga. I had it on the bookstore on my phone. It was really neat and memorable, and I'll always remember reading those stories. It's great stuff. When Pendulum Monsters came around, neither Chris nor I understood them at the time, and avoided locals outside of purposes to buy cards. I do remember facing Burning Abyss with my Gravekeepers deck around that time against deaf women at locals, but I still lost, but it was much more memorable. It was around this time that I started not to care about how much I lost. The game had truly helped me grow up. But through 2014, 15, and 16, I really got engaged by the anime. I tried convincing practically everyone I knew to play the game. I even dressed up in a Seto Kaiba costume my mom made for me for Halloween in 7th grade. When Duel Amino came out, I wrote tons of fanfics as Two-Faced Seto Kaiba, who eventually went on to become the Old Bay Duelist. In a middle school setting, trying to get everybody I knew to play did not go well, and I ended up getting bullied a lot, being cast out into the Nerd Clique, where I made some good friends, including JD, who was featured in my Summoning Animation tier list videos. In 2014 and 15, JD kind of ignored me, as he was new to the area and was generally an anti-socialite. When I joined the friend group in 2016, that was when JD and I really started to talk, now that he realized I wasn't part of the dozens of groups of idiots at school. Through this group of weirdos and outcasts such as myself, they were the few people who helped me grow my passion for the game, as it became my medium for making friends with most of them. One of the girls in the group that I had a crush on at the time, I had given a Heart of the Underdog Exodia deck as a gift, only to have it promptly returned to me about a month later, making me realize she wasn't into me. Aside from JD, the others that took to learning how to play were good elementary school friends of mine. One who I will call Typhon, after the fact that he went on to play DDD, and the other who I will call Dristan, after the fact that he went on to play Noble Knights. There were two others who I met in middle school that took to learning how to play. Let's call one of them Astrograph, after the fact that he went on to play Pendulum Magicians, and the other Erebus, after the fact that he went on to play Monarchs. Late in 2016, we all learned that there was going to be a new movie coming out, one that revolved around my favorite character, Seto Kaiba. January 27th, 2017, I had a birthday party for my upcoming 14th birthday, where I invited all of the previously described friends, as well as a few others, and Chris to come watch Dark Side of Dimensions on opening night in theaters with me. I would have invited Dan, but he wasn't interested at this point. Dark Side of Dimensions wasn't really in theaters in the state due to its limited release, so my mom reluctantly drove all my friends in a van down to the next state south, where it was playing. All of us got a copy of Obelisk the Tormentor in a fantastic, brilliant, gold rarity. One of the friends who didn't play even gave me his copy of Obelisk as a gift. I remember that movie to this day. That night, all of my friends had bought me Dark Side of Dimensions movie packs, and that was when my Blue Eyes White Dragon collection really started. I built a fully functioning Blue Eyes deck that could summon Chaos Max as well as Neo Ultimate. Chris helped me out by getting some of the more generic cards I needed from his now dismantled Chaos Dragon deck, such as Dragon's Mirror. Unlike all the people I named after cards, JD really took to playing the game. That night, he found his favorite character to be Joey Wheeler, and we even went on to joke that JD stood for Joey Dealer, who went on to build a Red Eyes deck, and became a new rival for me in addition to Chris. DSOD is still one of my favorite works that Kazuki Takahashi was ever behind, and is still one of my favorite movies to this day. I even went on to buy that movie on Steam a few years later so I could re-watch it whenever I wanted. A couple weeks prior, JD, Chris, Dristan, Typhon, and I had discovered Duel Links, and began playing it like madmen. A few months later, JD and I went on to duel at our 8th grade formal. After graduating middle school in 2017, JD, Astrograph, Erebus, and many of my other friends went on to a different high school due to how our area was districted. Dristan and Typhon went to the same high school as me, though. Our friend group had been split, although everybody remained in contact at first through Skype, but it eventually moved over to Discord. After several members of the friend group did not make the jump to Discord, I lost contact with them. JD, Erebus, and Astrograph, despite going to different schools, I managed to keep in contact with, although my contact with Erebus did kinda slip away from me. Astrograph went on to become a bit of a disgrace and was kicked out of the friend group a couple years later. 2017 was also that summer that the Link Strike starter deck came out, which Chris and I were mega excited for, as both he and I hated pendulums with a passion. So even though it hurt every other extra deck mechanic, Chris and I were excited for Link monsters. With the new Noble Knight Link monster, Dristan had started to pick up the game more so than he had before. As for Typhon, Link monsters hurt him hard, and he took a hiatus from the game. By the end of the year, my main deck was Blue Eyes with Neo Ultimate as my boss. Chris had moved on to playing a Lightsworn deck that he taught JD to play. JD was now both Red Eyes and Lightsworn, and Dristan played Noble Knights. In 2018, I learned of the new Gravekeeper's support in Soul Fusion, but I never really got any of it, as I was hyper-focused on Blue Eyes, my Cyburst deck made out of bulk from the starter deck, and my new Link deck, Altergeists, that Chris had gotten me into. Throughout 2017 and 2018, I thoroughly enjoyed watching Vrains in the Sub as it came out. A part of the intro that always stood out to me was the pixel-like Eye of Anubis that appeared, as a reminder to the legacy that Yu-Gi-Oh had built up over the years. It was also around the time that I really got into Yu-Gi-Tubers. Some of my early favorites were Yugi Nono, Mega Capital G, and Rank 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! In high school, I had decided not to use Yu-Gi-Oh! As a device to make friends, as I had learned my lesson about oversharing my passions to a bunch of school kids. The new friends I made in high school, I only ever suggested playing Yu-Gi-Oh! To once. If they said they weren't interested in it, then I left them alone. There were 2 people in my new group of friends who played Yu-Gi-Oh! Although one only played on Duel Links, the other was Evan, the co-host of my randomized progression series. In 2018, many of Chris's old decks had been dismantled by this point, valuable cards sold, and other cards kept in his massive collection. He did go on to get the Lair of Darkness structure deck, trying to use it as a catalyst to revive the old Dark World deck. It worked out well enough, and it could still hold its own against Blue Eyes, but eventually he gave that deck up too. His main deck was now the Lightsworn deck, as well as a Paleozoic Volcanic deck that held its own against Blue Eyes, but couldn't stand up to Altergeists, or the new, yet old deck that I had built that year, Zombie Horde. A revival of my original strategy, Zombie Horde's release was emotional for me. I got it immediately and started playing it. It had become the best deck in my friend group, in addition to Altergeists. Chris's next deck in 2019 was the Soulburner structure deck, Salamangrates. By this point, JD's main deck was Infernoids, and my Blue Eyes deck had trouble keeping up. I even removed the ritual part of it for the sake of consistency, but it really did struggle to win at this point. Late in that year, I got the Rocket Revolt structure deck, which stood up to Infernoids and Salamangrates, in addition to my Altergeist deck. It was around this point that I felt that I had finally surpassed Chris, and by that logic, Dan. I felt on top of the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! At the end of 2019, even winning the first duel of the new decade at the start of 2020. Of course, that's when 2020 hit. Everything Yu-Gi-Oh! Kinda got put on pause, or so one would think. Sets kept coming out despite the chaos in the world. Yu-Gi-Oh! Was destined to survive. Master Rule 5 had hit, and everybody in our group rejoiced. I got the Mechanized Madness structure deck that came out in April so that I could relive my glory days of Machina and zombies. Chris got the Shadal structure deck early that year as well, and I now had an arsenal of Blue Eyes, Altergeists, zombies, and Machina to work with, as well as a kind of failing Code Talker deck made of Cyber structure decks. Chris's arsenal consisted of the new Shadal deck, Salamangrates, and the Paleozoic Volcanic deck. And JD's arsenal consisted of Red Eyes, Cyber Dragons, and Infernoids. This was the state of things at the end of 2020. This was also around the time I started watching Hardleg Gaming, SEMO, DP Yu-Gi-Oh!, MBT, Nerd Factor, and Team APS. It's also around the time I started wanting to become a Yu-Gi-Tuber, but I didn't really have a good name for the channel yet. I was greatly inspired by the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series that started that year. By this point, Chris was in college, and I was ending my junior year in high school. Chris had made some friends in the card game club at his college, some of whom I even recognized from the board game club in my high school, such as a friend of ours who played Tenyi and Crystal Beasts. Dan had moved out by this point, although I did get a chance to duel him in the summer of 2020, letting him pilot my Machina deck. He did seem a bit dismayed at the state the game had come to, but he was still glad to be able to duel me, as he was sorry for how he was all those years back when he quit, at least in terms of not wanting to lose to me. I still keep him up to date anytime that Road Warrior is used in a new combo deck, and anytime 6 Samurais get support, as those are cards that I now immediately associate with him. November 11th, 2020, I had finally come up with a name for my Yu-Gi-Tubing channel. Although I couldn't think about any kind of videos to make, I wanted to make a video solidifying my presence on YouTube. Wham! Bam! Duel! New Yu-Gi-Oh! Content coming soon. Throughout early 2021, Evan and I begun our own version of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Progression series just for fun. We made it all the way to Blazing Vortex, the final core set at the time, in just a couple months, as we were in our senior year with very little else to do, even as our school did slowly transition back to being in person. Between November of the previous year and the spring of 2021, I somewhat lamented the fact that I hadn't been making any videos in spite of my whole coming soon part of the trailer. Just before I left for spring break in 2021, I made my first shitpost, The Ultimate Deck. It was, and still is, at least to me, absolutely hilarious. Unscripted, unedited, everything done through quick action in OBS Studio. After I got back from that spring break, I decided to make a scripted video. It didn't go well, and I kind of abandoned the series. I wanted to make a series that could be done like the Yu-Gi-Oh progression series, initially trying to make the Duel Terminal series, which sort of flopped so I cancelled it, making a shitpost out of the intro once Evan pointed out that I misspoke in it. I initially thought that I'd revive the Duel Terminal series as a way to tell about card lore, but once I realized that Master Duel would be taking care of telling card lore, I scrapped the series, leaving the trailer up as a memento. JD and I also did the first part of our Duel Links summoning animation tier list just before Arc 5 got introduced, and we had a grand old time doing so. I didn't really build any new decks in 2021, but JD did improve his Cyber Dragon deck with the addition of Cyber Strike coming out later that year. Also around that time, Chris actually opened up his collection to me, allowing me to take back some of the cards I had given to him when I quit all those years ago. So now I once again have my original copy of Red Eye Zombie Dragon, which was really cool of him to do for me. I graduated high school that year as well, making some friends who played Yu-Gi-Oh in the fall of that college semester, even helping Jackerton build their Cyber Dragon deck. It was also around that time that I got into Edison format, inspired by a series of History of Yu-Gi-Oh episodes. I thought it'd be cool to build a deck based on a format that was active around the time I started playing. Finally, in 2021, Evan and I started our first successful venture, the Randomized series. This year, I even got some creative help on it from Hardleg Gaming, whose Patreon I now support. He's helped me with thumbnails as well as the new intro. With the advent of Master Duel, I've also started the solo mode readings with help from friends I've made over the years. I also built a deck around the new Albaz structure deck that came out this year. With the advent of Battle of Chaos, I've improved my Blue Eyes deck so much that it can now hold its own against JD's Cyber Dragons, including his extra deck lock with Cyberdark End Dragon equipped with that one Buster Blader card. I've even been upgrading my zombie deck with some of the new support that came out of Dimension Force, so I really do feel like all of my decks are still really alive. With the new Dark World support right around the corner, I'm excited to see Chris's old Dark World deck again, after so many years. I know for a fact that even though Kazuki Takahashi won't be around anymore, he'll still be in all of our memories, and the magnificent stories and the game that he has created will live forever. Even if there comes a day when no more cards are printed, the cards that exist will still see play, will still be collected, and will still have meaning to the millions of lives that were touched by it. Kazuki Takahashi, I dedicate this video and my entire Yu-Gi-Oh experience to you. Your legacy is a truly great one. I've been Wham Bam Duel, and I'm always happy to see you. I'm always happy to see all of the friends I've made through your game, all of the cards I have collected, and all of the people who see my videos are proof of my experience with your creation. Thank you, Kazuki Takahashi. Rest in peace.